So in this video, we're going to look at how to plan and structure your answers for the EDUCAS Religious Studies Route A paper. This particular paper, we're going to be looking at Christianity. And some of the key things here to remember, and we'll look at this especially towards the end, is a lot of the stuff a lot of the questions are related to each other. And that's quite useful because as you go through the paper, if you forget the answer to a particular question, there's a likelihood that you could find some key cues or clues in some of the other questions. So, first things first. As I always like to say, try and start off with the larger question first. And in this paper, it will always be the D question. There's 4 kinds of questions. You have an A question, which is 2 marks, a B question, which is 5 marks, a C question, which is 8 marks, and a D question, which is 15 marks. In this particular paper, the Christian beliefs section has a SPAG question. Now, you cannot lose marks for SPAG, so do not stress if you are concerned about your spelling. You can only gain marks. Okay, so just to bear that in mind as you're writing your answer to this question, making sure that as and where you can, you're using correct grammar to really make sure that your communication of your arguments is very clear. Okay, because it will win you some extra marks. But once again, you can't lose marks for SPAG. So for this question, you get a statement, and the first thing that you want to do is you look at the statement and bulb, right? So bulb, we are boxing, and we've underlined Christian beliefs, heaven and hell, and out of date. Okay, those are the key things there. We need to discuss the statement showing that we have considered more than one point of view, and that's really important here, because if you don't give an alternative perspective or different point of view, then your marks will be capped, and you can lose as much as 8 marks if you don't give at least, or anywhere between 8 to 10 marks, I think, if you don't give at least 1 point, if you don't give more than 1 point of view. So the structure, so we're going to look at the structure for your paragraphs and the planning for this. So the planning for this, there's 2 ways that you can plan your 15 marker. The first way is many, some, others, and I. Okay, in terms of the paragraphs, that would be the first paragraph, second paragraph, third paragraph, and your conclusion. Okay. On the flip side, what you can do is very simply, firstly, secondly, thirdly, and finally, I. Yeah, or finally, or in conclusion. Right? Those are the 2 plans for your 15-mark question. Okay? What you then want to do is you want to give 3 paragraphs, right? 1, 2, 3. What you want to give 3 paragraphs, and their structure is what, how, why 1, why 2. And then we will look at C in a second. Okay? What, fairly standard, sort of what is the belief? How, usually a reference, even if it is paraphrased, to a source of wisdom. In this case, it would be the 2 sources of wisdom for Christianity are the Bible and the Nicene Creed. All right, so any reference to any of them. Why 1 is where you analyze. Okay, so you look at the meaning of it, analyze it. And then why 2 is where we evaluate it. Okay, basically on the strength or weakness of the arguments that you have presented. So what is the argument? Now, it's important to remember that you are presenting the arguments in this paper of Christians. Nobody really is bothered about your opinion until your conclusion. Okay, so you need to be thinking about what do different groups of Christians believe, right? Where your beliefs or your opinions based on those beliefs will come in is the conclusion. Okay, now there's 2 ways to do your conclusion. You can either add your conclusion at the end of every paragraph, right? Because you need to give supported judgments, right? This is where you give a judgment, all your judgments. Okay, and so this is where you can say, I agree or disagree. Or what you can do is leave your conclusion until the last paragraph. So you do this times 3, and then you give your conclusion. Either way is fine. So whether it's 3 what, how, why, C paragraphs, or 3 why paragraphs, and then you do your conclusion, which summarizes your judgments at the end anyway, is fine, right? Either one of those is okay, right? If you do the what, how, why, C format, then you do not have to do the overall judgments at the end. So if you do this version, so what, how, why, C, you don't have to add the conclusion at the end, because all of your judgments from the conclusion are already in your answer. Okay, you just must make sure that you make your judgments, make it very clear in your exam by stating what your judgment is about, whether you agree or disagree with the argument that you have presented. Okay, simple as. So that's your 15 marker, right? And here we can see that this one in particular is about beliefs about heaven and hell. So I'm just gonna do something here, right? So we've got Christian beliefs, Christian practices. We've got A, B, C, D. Those are the different questions. Okay, and here for Christian beliefs, we've got eschatological beliefs. All right, beliefs about the afterlife. Right, heaven and hell. Good. So we've got that first and foremost. Right, the structure for an 8 marker, simple, is what, how, why, times 2 to 3. Now, the reason we say 3, I would say 3, is because sometimes one of your paragraphs that you have presented could be a little bit weak. And very often the third one is the one that saves the marks. So, but if you're very confident and you feel like you've hit the structure and you hit all of the criteria, then 2 paragraphs is genuinely enough, especially because you've got to bear in mind you would have spent quite a significant amount of time on your D mark question. Okay, so here, once again, we are bulbing. So we need to explain Christian teachings about the incarnation. Now, what's worthwhile noting is that for the B, C, and D question in the beliefs section of the paper, you will need to refer to teachings. Okay, teachings are super important. You can't get the extra marks unless you can refer to Christian teachings from either the Bible or the Nicene Creed. Okay, so we've got that there. What, how, why, times 2 to 3, but definitely no more. And do stick to the structure because it keeps you clear, keeps you concise, saves you time on your other questions, especially when you've got a 15 marker. And yeah, overall, just help yourself by sticking to that strategy. The 5 marker, once again, we have got, let me go back actually. So we've got incarnation for C. So Ikra, right, stages of Jesus' life. And then we've got describe Christian beliefs about heaven. So we've got box, describe, and we have heaven there. Okay. So B questions will always ask you to describe, right? And that basically means that you need to give an account of something, or details of something, to report something, or to outline something. Okay, and it's vitally important here to get that extra mark, because this is effectively the structure for this. What, how, why for at least 1 paragraph, and what and why, or what and how for the other one. Okay, but what's important here is the description. I can't stress that enough. Okay, it has to be, well, actually, I wouldn't even do that to be on the safe side. What and why, right? The reason being is that here is where you're going to get your description in. Okay, detailing the influence and the details behind these core beliefs. Okay, so what, how, why, what, why. Okay, it is perfectly okay in here to add a second scripture. Okay, so you can refer to scripture twice, especially if you're confident doing it, because what has often happened is that if this this scripture is a bit weak, or the relevance between the description and the evidence is a bit weak, that second paragraph and the evidence there and the description in the Y section of your paragraph have saved some people. So definitely do not feel as if you can't put in more than one scripture. If you're confident, you feel like you can, and you've got a relevant scripture, do that. Okay, so here for question B, we've got questions about, once again, heaven. Right, and then A, we have, what do Christians mean by the resurrection? This is typically a defined question. Okay, the structure for this, for the 2 marks, would be either what and how, or what and why. Easy as. Okay, so that's the belief section. Once again, that section of the paper has answers you can only gain for SPAG, not lose. Okay, we're talking once again about resurrection. Now, here's just in the belief section. Okay, and that's also linked to Ikra, right? The R part. As you can see, it's already linked. Look, question A and question B are linked. Question A and question C are linked. Question B and question D are linked. So if, in theory, if you can answer either one or these combinations, whether it's A and B or C and D, you can definitely do the other questions in the paper for that section. Okay, good. Right, so we're going to move over to practices now. Same attitude, right? If we can, let's start. If we're feeling okay, let's start off with the 15 marker. Okay, here we've got the Eucharist and its importance for Christians with baptism. Okay, we need to discuss this, making sure that we've considered more than one view. Remember, the structure for this, there's 2. In terms of the plan, it's many, some, others, or I. Or firstly, secondly, thirdly, and then finally, / in conclusion. Okay, the structure for the paragraphs, what, how, why 1, why 2, and C, or what, how, why 1, why 2, and then you leave C for the final paragraph. Okay, remember, if you are doing this version, right, you do not need to include your conclusion because you're as a separate paragraph, because you would have been concluding throughout the through the essay. Okay, remember, we're looking at 3 paragraphs and they must explore at least 2 different views. Otherwise, they'll be capped. Okay, they will be capped. So that's that. So we've got sacraments there basically. So let's put sacraments at the front. Sacraments. Okay, explain why prayer is important for Christians. So we've got what, how, why, 1. Okay, because we are only explaining. There is no evaluation here. No evaluation, no conclusion. You are just explaining. Okay, this, yeah. So usually what we're looking for with the 8 marker is a diversity of views or practices, okay, or approaches to the practice. Okay, here it's easy. We can just explain 2 different reasons as to why prayer is important. Easy as. Okay, so once again, we box, we underlined prayer. And what's absolutely paramount, please, in this paper, but then also vice versa for the Islam paper, only refer to Christianity. Yeah, and in the Islam paper, only Islam. Right? Please, 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 please. So, what, how, why, 1. No evaluation, so there's no, this is a strong or weak argument, no conclusion. Just give 2, maximum 3, so 2 to 3 explanations as to why. There we go. Easy as. Right, so we've got prayer at the front. Cool. Next, describe how Christians might celebrate Easter. Okay, Easter. So we've got simply there, what, how, why 1. and then what and why. Remember, we are describing here. Okay, so we are trying to effectively give an account, report, or outline. Okay, easy as. And then here for the 2 marker, let me go back, sorry, Easter. And then lastly for the 2 marker, it's what and how, or what and why. Easy as. Okay, so that's the plan and the structure for each of the different types of questions. Now, just to sort of summarize, before we do that, let's find that question. Omnibenevolent. There we go. Sorry. There we go. Now, once again, there's an idea to say that these are linked. All right? Because what we have here, so we've got sacraments, and sacraments are often used during services celebrating Easter. Okay? And then we've also got omnibenevolent. An example of God's omnibenevolent is the sacrifice of Jesus for humanity's sins, or to atone for humanity's sins. So we've got omnibenevolent there, that's linked to Easter. Sacraments, they can be linked to Easter in terms of what is performed during services that celebrate Easter. And then we have prayer, which can be used to remember God's omnibenevolence, right? Can also be used during services that celebrate, right? So can we see how all of these are linked? Okay, and not only that, but they're also linked between the different sections. So the resurrection is clearly linked to Easter, right? Omnibenevolence is clearly linked to ideas about both heaven and salvation. So those two can join up there. Okay, as well as Jesus' teachings of love. Okay, prayer, once again, is also linked to Jesus' teachings on how to pray, i.e., the Lord's Prayer. Right? And we've also got sacraments, which are also linked to Jesus in terms of the Lord's Supper, or the Lord's Supper, the Last Supper, the Lord's Prayer. That's what I was meant to say. Okay, these are all different practices that Jesus taught that are also sacraments, right? So that's just there to show you that, look, don't get anxious about what's in the paper. Generally, everything is linked. Remember, as long as, if you are stuck, you come from a place of thinking about, okay, sort of, how is this maybe linked, especially in the belief section, to Jesus? How does that help? And in Christian practices, generally, we're looking around sacraments is a great place to start. Okay? But as you can see, everything is linked. Everything is linked. So, like, once again, if you can answer one question, the likelihood is you can answer probably most, if not all, of the questions in that exam. So you've got those links between the exam. You've got the structures for each of the different kinds of questions. Remember, you can only gain marks for SPAG, not lose marks for SPAG. Okay? Remember, there's no evaluation and no conclusion in the explained questions. And also, you are to describe in the B questions. And that you generally will need, especially in the belief section, you will need to refer to teachings. In the practices section, you can refer to scripture. That's fine. And you can also, so sources of wisdom and authority, you can refer to those. And we know that now they're the Bible and the Nicene Creed. Okay. But you can also describe in further detail the practice. So, for example, if a question comes up about the Eucharist, you can simply describe what the Eucharist is and what occurs during it. So, for example, Christians consume bread and wine in the belief that it represents Jesus, or in remembrance of Jesus. Right? Where it comes into the different kinds of beliefs and ideas, that can be slightly different according to which denomination you speak about. Right? But generally speaking, you can, in the practices section, for the evidence, so this is all for the how sections of your paragraphs, you can refer to both sources of wisdom and or practices in terms of detailing what they're about. Okay, so I think that's it. Definitely try that out. Like I said, I always believe that with exams and practice papers, try and time your answers. Okay, this is a really easy exam to work out the answer to marking ratio because it's 1 mark a minute. Easy as. All right? Best of luck.